Children come to us complete, perfect, ready to live in a perfect world. And instead of us being the ones to change or to change our world, we spend their growing up years training them how to live in an imperfect world. For example, children could be honest to a fault, as in they'll tell somebody that they're old or whatever that they notice. They'll just freely speak their thoughts. And we teach them that they need to hide these things, to not be like one open body where nothing's hidden. Or we say, you can't talk to this person, you can't trust these people. And for our world, that's correct that we teach them these things. But in a perfect world, they would be able to speak freely, to trust everybody. So let's learn about Matthew 18 and ask what the Spirit would have us to know. In that hour, or at that time, the Talmudim drew near to Yeshua, saying, "Who is the greatest of us all in the kingdom of heavens?" So to take after Satan is to be prideful. For somebody who is like the leader figure, like the son figure, the male, then they're supposed to convey that light to the feminine, to the children, to the kingdom. But if you're prideful and don't think you have any flaws, you'll just automatically demand that those you are leading just be like you, and you might not have patience with them because it's about you and not about the people that you're leading. So Yeshua called a certain small boy and set him in their midst and said, "Truly I say to you that if you do not repent and be or become like this boy, you will not enter into the kingdom of heavens." So this chapter is beginning with, you need to be like those you are leading. And then it's going to conclude with, you need to be like your Father in heaven who is merciful. So how can we be like those we're leading? I know as a parent, I can be humbled to see that I might have led my children more astray with the world that we're in. So it's like this balance of they got to be in the world, and the world is so influential on them. But they came to me pure, and now they've been influenced, and even myself, that whatever the parent has, this passes on to the children. So it can be very humbling. So how is a child? A child is going to be humble. So that's what we're going to learn right here. But he who will humble himself or become humble, like this boy, will be or become great in the heavenly kingdom. So a leader, like a king, should be representing the people, and not saying that the people need to represent him, like you just need to be like me. The purpose of leading the people is to be their servant, so to become very humble. And God does this when like the Son of Man comes down to take on human flesh. He's humbling himself to in all ways be tempted like we're tempted, to kind of take on a changing garment. So it's like not who he is, but he's willing to kind of lower himself, debase himself in that way to meet us where we're at. And whosoever will support one boy like this in my name supports me. And he who offends, so this kind of imply that children are kind of come from this pure spirit. So what directly proceeds from God is pure and of the same substance of God, like it's unchanged when it first proceeds from God. And then we could be training it to become corrupt, like us. But he who offends, the concept of offend in Hebrew understanding is to cause someone to stumble. So I don't know if this is the same word every time. Sometimes it says stumbling block, sometimes it says offends. One of the little ones who believe in me, it will have been more fitting to him if he be hanged or cast into the sea. So when we ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people, things like that, sometimes it's because it's the leadership that God has entrusted. We are supposed to stick up for each other. And does God want these things to happen? No, he doesn't. It bothers him far more than it even bothers us when one of these little ones get led astray. He's very defensive of people who don't have a correct leader, like orphans and widows, or somebody who is very humble, somebody who is broken. These are the ones that God takes the defense of. And so just because it seems like he's not, it's because he's entrusted these leaders. And so for a time, he allows this to happen, but it's going to be terrible for those people who did these things. And have a pair of millstones on his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of stumbling block or offenses. It is necessary that the stumbling blocks come. However, evil is he who offends another or who causes another to stumble. So offend, stumbling block. If your foot or your hand is the stumbling block, cut it off or remove it far from you. The or possibly indicates that the application of the parable that follows, which is remove the stumbling blocks far from you. So this parable that follows will go in hand with this. So we first need to be humble, and when we're humble, we'll be willing to change. If we're just prideful leaders, it's not the problem of the people we're leading, it's going to be our own problem, and we've just created a stumbling block for the people we're leading when we're demanding them to be like us. For it is more fitting for you to enter into the Garden of Eden. So it might not even say heaven. When it says, like, the Jewish understanding is you automatically go to Sheol if you have any kind of taint on you still, on your soul. But then you can go to the Garden of Eden as soon as all of that has been cleansed from you. Garden of Eden crippled, then walking in Gehenna with 2 hands or with 2 feet. One understanding of this is we're all one body, so you need to cut off that person that is being a stumbling block to others, or just individually, what part in your life, in your own individual body, causes you to stumble. Like, if your computer is your temptation, get rid of your computer. And if your eye offends, who causes to stumble, uproot it. He's got the word it there from the Vatican Library manuscript, and remove it far from you. For it is more fitting for you to enter into the Garden of Eden with 1 eye than into Gehenna with 2. Guard yourselves that you do not despise one of these small ones. For I say to you that any man has 100 sheep, and one of them goes astray or becomes lost, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go to search for that which went astray? And if it happens that he finds it, truly I say to you that I have more joy about it. in the Hebrew style, Yeshua is hinting that he is the shepherd when he says, I. Then about the 99 that were not lost. So it's basically like he's the only good shepherd. What the Pharisees had done is they would traverse land and sea to make one convert, and then when they made one, they made them twice a son of Gehenna than themselves. So if you're not willing to deal with your own sins, with your own problems, not only do you go to Gehenna with both your eyes, you also pass on that disease to the ones who become your sons, the ones who learn to be just like your image. If so, sometimes means thus. So it could say, thus, it is not from our Father who is in the heavens that one of these small ones should perish or go astray. If your fellow or your neighbor sins against you, let them could refer to the offenses, hurt. So it could mean like keep it between you and them instead of spreading it around. Let them hurt between you and him. And that is, we'll find that in Paul's epistles. First, speak to you and him. Or it might just be here. So this is what the footnote says. Let the offenses be between you and him. Deal first with it privately. If he listens to you, you must relieve him. Or possibly you have gained him, so you no longer have that offense between you and him. So now you are together again, like you don't have to cut them off. You've gained him, they're still part of your body. But if he does not listen to you, take one companion with you, or two, for every testimony is established by 2 or 3. Okay, so one with you is you and the other, or 2. And if with this he does not hear you, report it in the assembly. And if when you tell it in the assembly, he does not listen to you, remove far from him like an enemy and publicize him. This kind of is showing that when he says cut off your eye or your hand, he's talking about a member as far as another person that you're joined with. Truly, I say to you, you is plural throughout here, that whatever you will bind in the earth will be bound in the heavens, and whatever you will loosen on the earth will be loosened in the heavens, unless it's going against the word of God, because he did tell this to Peter previously. And then Peter is like, you will not die. This is wrong. And he says, get behind me, Satan, right? I would say. And again, I say to you that if there be in, or possibly among, 2 of you so much of shalom upon the earth, that my Father who is in the heavens will give to you all that you will ask. For at the place where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am in their midst. So how do we have shalom? We could be rebuking others, but in a way to try to gain them so that they're not harming other people by being part of our midst, by being a stumbling block. And that's how we have wholeness. Then Kepha came near, or unto him, and said, Adon, a fellow or a neighbor who sins against me, how many times must I pardon him? Now we're getting into the section of God is merciful, so we should be merciful. Yahushua, if he's pardoning all of our sins, and then we go around and tell people how terrible they are, and it's actually out of hatred and judgment, this is pushing them further away, then we're not actually being helpful to them. So it's this wonderful balance of you tell somebody in love, not to be seen. If you want to be seen, you're going to start with the assembly. You're going to be broadcasting this hurt, this offense. But your goal is you want to gain your brother. You don't want any change in who God is in you. You as the leader need to be the one who is willing to change before you try to lead anybody else. And now, when you are leading somebody else, you need to be very patient with them. You have been forgiven much. Okay, so you've tried to align yourself back to who God is, and He's forgiven you. And now you need to show the same patience to those you are leading. Should I forgive him 7 times? Yeshua said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but I say to you 70 times. In the book of Daniel, it was 7 times 7 weeks. So this is like the amount of times that he was patient with us before he brings us the Messiah. So it's 70 times 7 that he has forgiven us. And therefore, the kingdom of heavens is like a man, a king who wanted to hear a report from his servants. And when they began to relate or recount or recite the report, they brought one man who owed him 10,000 coins, and this other manuscript said golden coins. And when he did not have anything to repay, the master commanded that they should sell him and his wife and his sons, and whatever he might have, that it should be repaid. So first of all, we need to understand the Torah, that what is just is that we deserve death, or we deserve to repay our sin. But the debt was so high we couldn't. And so he forgave us all when we ask him. Like he forgave us all, but we need to ask him. Like we need to connect with that. Then that servant knelt down on the ground, pleading for grace and saying, Master, have mercy on me, and I will repay you your debt. Then the master had compassion on the servant and let him go and forgave him all the debt. So it could talk about how Moshe interceded for the people. So like Yahushua interceding for us, because it does seem like he forgave us all the debt while we were still sinners, before we even asked. So based on this parable, it would seem like somebody had asked, and it would kind of line up here, because he's relating a report, and then they're bringing in one example. So how that he treats this one example would be how he treats the rest. And so from a Jewish perspective, the king would get judged first, and then the people. So he could be bringing in the king, except in this case, the king would be sinless, like if it's Yahushua and the one interceding. So the report could be all the debts, and then they're bringing in an example. But when that servant had gone out, he found one of his fellows who owed him 100 plain coins, and he grabbed hold of him and strangled or choked him, saying, Repay what you owe. Then he pleaded with him for grace and said, Have mercy on me, and I will repay you. But he did not want to give attention to or listen to him, but went and placed him in prison until he would pay the debt. And when the servants of the master saw this, they were very dismayed. So they went unto the master and reported to him all that he did to him. Then the master commanded that they should bring him to him. And that's something is typical in Hebrew. Him to him. And he said to him, Evil servant, did I not forgive the debt that you owed because you pleaded with me for grace, because you implored me? Therefore, were you not supposed to have done the same or acted in the same way by having compassion on that other servant like I had on you? And the master was grieved and delivered him to oppression until he should repay all the debt. Just so will my Father who is in the heavens do to you, if you do not forgive from a good heart your fellows. Okay, so Messiah is our example here, where anyone who is a leader, needs to make sure that we're following God and not going off on our own like the devil, to be prideful, to think we can lead on our own as if we are righteous on our own. And we also need to be very humble and merciful and patient, because that's imitating the Father, and also like meet the people where we're at, to be patient with them. Getting into our commentary, he's pointing out that how we need to repent is to be like the Father. So we are returning to the Father and becoming like this boy, which could be like one and the same if we're thinking that what is closer to how the Father is like this child who is actually very pure. So we're returning because we come from God to be like God, just like when we were a child who were pure and also humble. In verse 10 here, all of this seems to be added. So it's a verse that a lot of people use to prove that everybody has a guardian angel. And it's not even in this text here. Verse 10 just says, guard yourselves that you do not despise one of these little ones, versus again here, all these words being added. And then it goes from 10 to verse 12 here. And same here, it goes from 10 to verse 12. And so we have another verse that is added, for the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. So it does make a transition into this next parable, as far as maybe the children had a stumbling block and now he's coming to save them. But here he's pointing out uses of angels, and the closest thing to a guardian angel, maybe in what he's listing, is that the servant girl praying for Peter, thought that the person knocking could have been his angel. Don't know if this was in the original manuscript, but that kind of brings up the thought that when people go on these like ghost hunts, these investigations, sometimes they'll hear a voice that sounds just like them and they'll think it's a demon. So that might not be too good if you hear your own voice, to just assume that that is your angel. So we can learn from this that God does not look down on any of us, even those who have been led astray. He comes to seek and to save that which is lost. So we're learning that these leaders, these disciples, were arguing who's the greatest, and that's very prideful. What they need to do is be humble. And then the opposite of this is, if they weren't humble, they're instead going to end up despising, out of their own pride and selfishness of who's greatest. They're going to think the others are worse than themselves, are less than them. And apparently God does not do this. He does not think that we are worse than he is. I would say what he does instead is he becomes the worst of the worst, the most despised, the most rejected, to take the place of anybody else who has been despised in this way. How do we treat a pagan or a tax collector? Aren't we in the context of seeking and saving that which is lost? Do we not love the pagan or the tax collector? This was curious to me because the book of Matthew is written by a tax collector. So how does he refer to this? He says, like an enemy, and publicize him. So apparently there's 4 levels. Between you and him, try to work this out. Between you and one or other witnesses, work this out. Between you, like him, and the assembly, and then publicize him, not just the church, the assembly, also the rest of the world. You can let this be known, like their sin, their trespass, so that others aren't led astray by this. So you're treating them like an enemy. Now we can love our enemies, but they are not beneficial to the body, and so they can't continue to influence the body, and you will let other people know this as well. So you are seeking reconciliation, forgiveness, and very important here that the you is plural, that you are not walking around binding people because they did not submit to you and decide to be just like you. You don't have that authority singularly to do this. So it'd be like you, this church, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. So it has to be you, plural, because he follows this up with two, just so much as two of you. So this would be the second step where you get to 2 or 3 witnesses, that if you're coming into agreement, then you can bound anything. So now this person has become bound. And what does Peter get out of this is he says, so how many times I can just forgive them? 7 times. And now he's talking about how often we should forgive someone. So what is the meaning of this binding and loosing? In the context here, where there's 2, there's 3, the Father's in the midst. So we're knowing that it's binding or loosing someone who's causing offense. So is this having to do with 1, halacha, or 2, like prayers, like whatever you believe together? Does that form like a Jewish minyan? And whatever you ask will be done? Or 3, is it about forgiveness and loosing of sins? So Peter, he seems to draw this conclusion that it is pardoning sins, but has Peter repented? Because who was arguing at the beginning of this chapter who would be greatest? So we learn in John that James and John were 2 that argued, so they kind of agreed together that they would rule together. So who else would they think would be the greatest? And it could be Peter. It could be Peter here maybe trying to justify himself based on the context of still being prideful. They're arguing who is the greatest. So our commentary is drawing the conclusion that this is halacha, what is prohibited or permitted. And so we have this quote here, in the power of binding and loosing was always claimed by the Pharisees. Let me see where it says. I thought it was from Josephus. Maybe that's a separate quote. Under Queen Alexandria, the Pharisees, says Josephus, in Wars of the Jews, became the administrators of all public affairs, so as to be empowered to banish and readmit whom they pleased, as well as to loose and to bind. The various schools had the power to bind and to loose. So in context, he's talking to the disciples who are leaders, and the ones that you get as witnesses probably shouldn't be just any old witness, but in court, it could be like anybody who's actually witnessed the crime. That is to forbid and to permit, and they could bind any day by declaring it a fast day. This power and authority vested in the rabbinical body of each age or in the Sanhedrin received its ratification and final sanction from the celestial court of justice. So God gave them this authority. In this sense, Jesus, when appointing his disciples to be his successors, used the familiar formula. By these words, he virtually invested them with the same authority as that which he found belonging to the scribes and Pharisees, who bind heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but will not move them with one of their fingers, that is, loose them, as they have the power to do. In the same sense, in the second epistle of Clement to James II, Peter is represented as having appointed Clement as his successor, saying, I communicate to him the power of binding and loosing, so that with respect to everything which he shall ordain in the earth, it shall be decreed in the heavens, for he shall bind what ought to be bound and loose what ought to be loosed, as knowing the rule of the church. So it doesn't seem like just anybody has the right to banish somebody from the church. That seems to be the context here. But I don't think we'll get into being able to finish the rest of this, and so we'll pick up on it next time to see if this represents a messianic minion.